Hey everyone, my name is Lauren Dooley and I'm a student at George Mason University. I will be presenting on chapter 14 of our textbook. The title of the chapter is Evidence-Based Application of Staff and Caregiver Training Procedures. The objectives of this presentation is to gain knowledge of best practices on behavior analytic caregiver and staff training procedures. Something that they talk about in this chapter, the main thing they talk about is behavior skills training. And then the next objective is be able to tell the difference in the scope of the training and motivational variables across two situations. So this is an important objective because something that's special about chapter 14 is that they do identify the differences in, like being able to train people at different skill levels and in different settings and with different backgrounds. And you also have to consider the different social validities. For example, a teacher would have different social validities than, an in-home respite care provider. So that's that's a really important objective for this chapter. The BACB task list items that will be addressed in this presentation are design and use competency-based training for persons who are responsible for carrying out behavioral assessment and behavioral change procedures. That's pretty much a summary of chapter 14 right there. So now I'm going to go ahead and talk about the main points. The main thing the chapter 14 talks about is that there's a need to not only just train staff members, but use ABA to train staff members. We're really good at it. So chapter 14 can sound a little repetitive at times because it's just using task analysis, it's using ABC, contingency-based reinforcement, all kinds of things, all of the different evidence-based practices that we've been learning thus far in the ABA coursework program that we're all in. And so the first main point that I have is implementing a behavior intervention plan requires caregivers and staff to complete a complex chain of behaviors with fluency. And that particularly, I like the language that I use there in terms of like the complex chain of behaviors with fluency. It's not just like one behavior or isolated behaviors. It's a chain that needs to happen in a specific order with specific timing. And the person needs to feel so comfortable with it that it's almost like second nature or autopilot. As with our clients, this type of skill requires contingency-based training to be mastered. So, like we see, a lot of us see task analysis for things like hand washing and brushing teeth, getting dressed, there's a lot of functional life skills. Sometimes, there's also academic, or more educational examples as well. So what this requires is, brushing teeth is, to us seems really simple, but like if you think about it, I remember when I first started out in ABA, I think it was like 10 years ago, maybe more actually, more. But when I started out in ABA, one of the first things that I was asked to do when I was learning about task analysis, before I knew what task analysis was, and before I really had thought about behavior, and this is even, pre my professional career in special education, ABA was really my first glimpse into working with people who are neurodivergent and, really getting into the evidence-based practices and applied behavior analysis. And anyway, so just writing out I was asked to write out the steps of what you need to do what the instructor needed to do to open the door. And took me a while, and like I had to revise it multiple times. You just don't think about the little actions that like just happen as second nature for a lot of us because we learned it when we were little kids. And if you think about the way that behavior analysis describes everything needs to be contingency based. And for example, like if you're doing a task analysis, if something isn't naturally reinforcing the behavior, then like you can't stand in the bathroom with the client all day every day, with your reinforcer and task analysis list. So like that's another important thing to consider. The second main point I wanted to talk about was now they're actually introducing in the chapter behavioral skills training. Behavior skills training, so what I like to think of the behavior skills training is basically it's a task analysis for adults to be able to train adults using ABA. It's basically it's a task analysis, and there doesn't seem to be a set of just like concrete steps for BST from the more recent articles that were published in 2018, 2019, and 2020. It looks like the behavioral skills training varies depending on the training, which makes sense. But this chapter goes into how it can be effectively used to train caregivers and staff on how to use a variety of evidence-based practices. And like I said, BST is, it seems like it's not fully fleshed out. It seems like very variable, like there are many options, but I've only seen it or experienced it during training when I worked for a private applied behavior analysis company. I've never seen it used in the public or private education school systems, which is, something to think about. But anyway, the four main components are instruction. So, showing a quick video, doing a quick lecture, quick PowerPoint like I'm doing right now. Right now I'm doing the instruction, if you will. Really, I'm just summarizing a chapter, but instruction and then modeling. So once you talk about it, then you go ahead and show them. You can either do it in person, you can do a video modeling. Personally, it's funny because anyway, the next one is rehearsal and feedback. So instruction, modeling, rehearsal, and feedback. And there's a whole section in this chapter about the technological advances that have been happening to help us to create training, BST, training based on the BST model virtually. I think that as someone who has done the online RBT training multiple times, the 40-hour training, I think I've done it like 4 times. I did not feel skilled after that training. I felt knowledgeable. I had all that knowledge in my head, like I knew reinforcement, I knew punishment, like I knew the behavior basics, and I felt confident in my knowledge. And then I went to work with, like I just went to pair even with a client for the first time ever, and my mind went blank. There, like with the online the technological version of BST training for applied behavior analysis, I don't, it's human behavior. Like you can't, I don't know. I just think it's hard to only do a behavioral intervention if you're only doing it using technology. For me personally, as someone who learns a little bit differently than the general population, the modeling, the rehearsal, and the feedback really need to be in person for me. And I think that in terms of like looking at other professionals around me, who have gone through a BST type training when they work for private ABA companies, um, I see the same thing in them. So I don't know if I'm alone in that, but that's just my opinion. But those are the four main components. And then main point number 3, explicitly teaching maintenance and generalization can increase treatment fidelity and outcomes for the client. So same for, with every client, we have a maintenance and a generalization program before, like as we're writing the goal. So like we write a goal or a target, and then we immediately already have the maintenance and the generalization plan in place. And of course, I've revised quite a few interventions multiple times. So but you do have the plan ahead of time. So like it would be the same if you're changing an adult's behavior. So let's say I want an adult to be able to ignore screen behavior. That's part of the intervention, and I'm teaching them why and how to ignore, and when, why, and how not to ignore. And so, for example, in terms of maintenance, the main thing for maintenance, based on what the text says, is that you really need to look at things that are just the natural reinforcements that are gonna pop up because of this. Um, in the example that I said, in terms of like ignoring screaming behavior, one would hope that the maintenance would be that the parent or the caregiver starts to see that the screaming behavior is decreasing. So of course that's going to help them maintain their reaction to it. And then generalization is important too. So like, for example, if the screaming behavior is happening at home, obviously the family is going to want to go out in public. And so, um, doing a generalization program for the parent, not for the, for the client as well, but also for the parent and those working with your client. They need to be able to generalize it too, not only to different settings, but to different applications. So let's say that it's the weekend and your company is not available, or you're not available, and your the behavior therapist that's working with them, that works under you, is there and has a question, but you're not available, for example. You want not only your staff, but also the parents, if the screaming behavior, for example, the topography of the behavior changes, like let's say it's kicking, but the function is still the same. If you taught generalization explicitly, then the parent and the staff member should be able to generalize that, oh, well, this is the protocol we are using for the screaming behavior. It looks that, like the function is the same, but the topography of the behavior looks a little different. So, but, I'm just going to generalize the intervention, and see what happens. And a lot of times it's effective, and it can increase the treatment fidelity, like I said. Another main point is an evaluation and progress monitoring system for trainees should be created before the training begins, as well as performance criteria of trainees. Again, you want to have a solid structure before you're starting, when you're coming up with a training program or a single training event, which is what I'm about to talk about. So when you are looking at creating a behavior skills training intervention or program, it is extremely important that you look at how you're going to monitor evaluation and progress for all of the trainees. And it needs to be systematic, it needs to fall under applied behavior analysis. So it needs to be systematic, it needs to be evidence-based, tons of data, that's it, period. And it definitely needs to be created before this all starts. If you create an evaluation or progress monitoring system, that obviously is directly related to an employee, they're going to notice. Um, and performance criteria of trainees is important as well. And just like our students, we have to understand that everyone is coming in with different levels of skill, different backgrounds, and some people might require different types of prompting, different levels of prompting, different reinforcement schedules, and maybe different performance criteria at each level. Like someone who has a lot of experience might be able to come in and you can expect 95% accuracy from them, but someone is interested in getting into the field and this is their first experience, like I think it's fair to say like 50% accuracy at first is like, it's not that bad. So that's just another thing to consider. And the last main point is there's two different types of training. I've kind of been hinting at this. A lot of the main points I've discussed so far have mainly been looked at in single event training. So single event training is essentially what, it's using a BST to teach a single skill. So like I gave the example of the screaming child, the parent, and, hypothetically, my staff member who's working with the client. So in a single event training, I did a single, in the hypothetical situation, I did a single event training for the caregiver and my staff member to do a planned ignoring intervention. So that's a single event training. I'm taking a single evidence-based practice and I'm teaching it to a select number of people and it's directly targeted towards the client. Now you also have training systems and they're different. They're not the same as single event training. Single event training seems to be the most effective form, but there just isn't manpower. Training systems reach a wider scope. They're easier to do. Training systems, a lot of time, it's just, it's the RBT 40-hour training, basically, is a training system. And the reason why training systems are used more than single event training, even though single event training is wildly more effective, it's because time and manpower cause professionals to use single event training less and training systems more. So that this chapter left me with a lot of questions, a lot of motivation, and just a lot of interest in general in the topic of training. And kind of what I took from this is that it motivated me to find a way that we can find something that is in between a training system and a single event training in a way that does incorporate, digital format, but also in-person intervention parts as well. And so that's just something I've been interested in recently. All right, let's practice. In chapter 14, a 6-step I messed up, BST intervention study was mentioned. What would your BST intervention look like? How many steps would it have? And what would they be and why? Use your own BST created intervention steps to write an outline of a training you would conduct for an applied behavior analysis evidence-based practice. Make sure to include target audience, setting, and manpower requirements, which includes frequency and duration of training sessions. A little tip, decide if it is a single event training or a training system before thinking about your BTS intervention steps. Also, another helpful tip is that it's much easier to create a single event training BTS intervention step plan. That is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed chapter 14.